Yeah, so net neutrality is a fucking horse shit, and Firefox is all about it. And now Firefox is trying to update, and it's being dick balls. Okay. And now we're late. That's good.
So there's no way we're going to get to all my notes. I took so many notes. This movie, it took me about 3 hours to watch this movie because I paused it about every 10 seconds to write down what stupid horse shit they were saying.
That's funny because it's only an hour long.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, an hour. No problem. I'll get through this before you know it. Oh, wait, I'm 5 minutes in and I've written a page of notes. Great.
Yep, I was doing pretty similar shizzles on my end there, doggy.
At the end of your penis.
Yarp. Trying to dial this in so that I'm loud enough and you're not blowing me out the water because that's what happened last time.
I feel like about 15 years ago, I would have been like all about this movie. Like, yeah, you got to watch this movie. This movie's great. It's totally good.
Tells you all about all the problems in the world and how to fix them or something.
Yeah.
All right. Firefox is now going. That's a good thing. Let's see what PoopTube does for me. PoopTube.
I like the way this dumb movie had its cake and ate it too. Like on the one hand, it's whining about how all these Asian people are being lifted out of poverty. And it's like, but is it fair? What the fuck is that?
You could hear that?
Yeah, it's shit house in my ear hole.
Yeah, super fucking loud too. It's the PoopTube channel. All right, let's see. Will it let me go live? Camera to use. Integrated webcam. Default, yes. And allow. Something's not right. Try reloading the page. Fuck you and work. Okay. Oh, all right. I'm going to disconnect from you for a moment, and I'll call you right back on this thing.
Yeah, you do what you got to do.
All right. Moments away. We're moments away. Nope, wrong one. Not Chromium. Yo.
What's up, Cyber UCam 5? Please start UCam.
Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. Shouldn't be doing that. Where's my settings? Integrated webcam. There we go. And allow. Yeah? No? Yeah? Does it do anything?
You ask me a question?
Use microphone. Use camera. Yes. Can you see?
This should just be an old man podcast about how to try to record a podcast. That's just all that should be. Oh, this works. Working now? Oh, only one person could hear. Then the other guy can hear and the other person can't hear. Just switch back and forth.
Well, it says the camera's on, like the little lights
Super
on, but I
entertaining.
can't see myself. Can you see me? No, you can't see me. God damn. All right, I'm going to try one more time. Stand by.
Right?
Use the camera. Allowed. Use the camera. Yes, allowed. All right. I might need to call you right back.
What's the deal with airline food?
All right, so it says that the using of Firefox is experimental or whatever.
It's true. It is.
All right, let's see if I can get the PoopTube to work now. Integrated webcam, default, allow. Okay. Be sure to allow access. Remember, allow. Integrated webcam, default, and littering and. All right, we're not going to get webcam access. Fuck.
That's a shame.
All right, well, what I can do is give the link to Jack and get him in here. So we'll do that. Oh, we will. All right. This has been pre-show content for our Patreons. So good. So good. All right. Jack should be in a moment. Maybe this camera will show up for him, but it won't do any good because I can't get it to stream to YouTube. So it's whatever. It's just audio recording at this point. That's fine. All right. See what happens. We will see. Well, we will see, Robert.
Oh, really?
Oh, really, fool. This is going to be like the best, most baller episode ever.
Well, it's about time we had a baller episode.
Baller-ass episode.
Well, I got my full regiment of vitamin D. Let me tell you, I was out in the sun for hours.
You got sun down there? It was all, well, we had some sun breaks up in this realm.
Dude, there's mad sun all over the place.
Must have blown all that.
All over my face, neck, and chest.
Yeah, you making movies again? Not just talking about them on a podcast?
Yeah. Sun was splashing down.
All over your neck, arms, and chest.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. At least you're making the most of your time there.
Time on Earth, Daniel. There's only so much of it.
Oh, don't remind me, dude.
What, you're going to get old and die?
It's happening. It's.
I know, it's happening before your eyes. I like that.
How's my audio to you, by the way?
You sound like a dog shit took a fart.
I do?
He was talking to me.
Oh. I'm like, I didn't even get all the way on.
All right, so we've been having tech difficulties for a little while. My camera won't work, so And I
Sad.
can't stream to YouTube, so you don't even, I mean, you can be on a webcam and I can see you, but no one else will be able to.
Oh,
So, up to you.
well, that's sad. I'm just kidding. I don't care.
All
I'm
right.
just figuring out. Oh, it's good height here.
So, this is still a little bit of pre-show content. We do publish this out to our Patreon supporters. So I don't want to say too much that's like under wraps, but from what I understand, you're okay going by Jack or Jamie in this episode?
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's great.
All right, excellent. And I don't know if you've heard the show recently, but we do kind of a twofer now. So we do the actual Anarchy show, and then we do the Last Nighters within that.
Cool.
So we introduce, we do a little banter with the actual Anarchy audience, and then we say, all right, we're going to get into the normie-friendly version of the show that you can share with your family and friends. Get in the Last Nighters, and we sort of reintroduce ourselves, and then we would introduce you at that point, so that we haven't had guests in a while, but you can like plug, like who you are and where people can find your stuff and all that. And then we get into the movie, and we go about an hour, and then we wrap up the Last Nighters. Then we do a few more minutes at the end for actual Anarchy. And then we go into what's called Kathleen Turner Overdrive if you are game to stick around longer.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. I'm down. I'm here.
All right. And Robert, can you hear?
What?
You didn't see that. He's prepared. He's prepared for the alien invasion here.
I'm ready. Yeah.
All right. So, Robert, you remember Jamie, right? Jamie, Jack. You went by Jack on a previous episode, I think.
Cool.
We did the Wolverine episode, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. All right.
I remember.
See, Robert
Years
remembers
ago.
stuff. It's usually me who doesn't remember stuff.
It's always you.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess we'll just call you Jack. You're in Florida again, yeah?
Yep.
All right.
It's nice and warm here. Been a little rainy, but warm.
Yeah. So Robert, Jack and I and the philosopher had lunch at a Mexican restaurant in Mount Vernon, of all places.
In the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it was like a neighborhood. But it's a good place, good food.
That was pretty good. It was pretty good. I had a little indigestion after. I think it came from the Mexican food, but I don't know. Could have been from the drinks.
They just don't have the regulations.
Yeah. The regulations, if only.
Don't go bungee jumping in Mexico. All right. So I think we're just about ready to get started if you are.
Oh, I'm so ready.
Okay, Robert, you pretty ready there, buddy?
Oh, yeah, baby.
So ready. You're born ready. Okay, I'm going to start the clock here. And all right. I think we're good. Make sure I got my notes. Totes my goats, got my notes.
You have notes with them, bro.
Oh, we got some notes. We got
Yeah.
crazy notes.
Good. Oh, yeah, I watched it again, too. Been a while.
Yeah, well, you might be surprised on this episode how we took this one.
Yeah, I'm very surprised already.
It'll be a good.
I was surprised when I watched it. I was like, wow.
It'll be a good conversation. All right.
Yeah.
I think we're ready here.
In 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe Libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy Podcast, the podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian and Anarcho-Capitalist perspective. Tonight, we have a guest who's going to be joining us, and it's related to, well, the time of year where all the little kidlings go back to the school, and millions of them are going to go back and head back into the camps, the day prisons, for another year, and This will be episode 92, where we're talking about schooling the world. And I'm going to introduce our guest in just a few minutes once we get into the Last Nighters portion of the show. But before we do that, let's say a little hello to Robert. How you doing, sir?
What's up, everybody? Back to do another show. Happy to be here.
All right. So
How you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing well. We have a fair amount of pre-show content of us fumbling around like old men trying to get the technology to work. So I think that's going to have to make up for some of the lack of actual Anarchy content here before we get into the Last Nighters portion of the show. But the show notes and more can be found at actualanarchy.com/92. And if you're ready, Robert, and mystery guest, we can get into the Last Nighters portion of the show.
Why wouldn't we?
All right. Diddle-oo, diddle-oo, diddle-oo. Wayne's World. Wayne's World. Hey everyone, it's Daniel and Robert, the Last Nighters, and we're going to talk about schooling the world. This is episode 35, and the show notes and more can be found at lastnighters.com/35. A couple of quick announcements. We have a special guest, Jack V Lloyd of the Voluntaryist Comic, and we are talking about schooling the world. This is a movie that he suggested after I was like, hey, I want to talk about school a little bit. And he was game, and so Robert and he and I are all going to do this, and here we are. So, Jack, you want to introduce yourself and mention what you do and where people can find your work?
Sure. I am Jack V Lloyd, as some see me on the internet, mostly arguing in threads. And I do a lot of things. It's hard to put it all in one short bit, but basically I make a lot of memes and produce a lot of content, sometimes for myself, sometimes for others. Make comic books related to Liberty with Voluntarist, make some Anarchy Ball stuff here and there. And just pretty much kind of am I guess you could say a KY jelly or Astroglide of Liberty. I just like to help make things smooth and liquid for people so they have a lot more pleasure spreading the message.
Well, that's right up our alley. All right, and where can people find you other than in the Facebook threads? Was it volcomic.com? That's the website?
Yeah, that's a good one. So Volcomic, VOLCOMIC, volcomic.com is a major outlet you'd see me on. And something soon coming through the works. It's in the slow process, but I've been prototyping it for a while. Is the Voluntarist Association, vassociation.com. But that's in the near future. So that's another project I'm working on. All
right, very cool. And speaking of projects that we work on, this show is part of the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. So Launchpadians and everyone else, you can find this at thelaunchpadmedia.com. I always forget to plug that, right, Robert?
You're doing great, Daniel. Keep it up, buddy.
Well, at least it's in the first 5 minutes of the show this time versus last time. It was probably a good 20 minutes in. But I got to say, my favorite time when we plugged it in was it the Planet of the Apes? It was something where it was like halfway through, and we were cracking a joke about, was it elephants or camels or poop or something? And we were like, you only get this level of insight from the Launchpad Media. See,
yeah, that sounds about right.
I have a terrible memory. I don't
remember what you're talking about, but I believe you when you talk about us making a joke about poop or animals.
Poop and animals. Poop. Yeah. Anyway, this is a highbrow show, and we have a very highbrow guest. So we're going to have some good times tonight. We're going to talk about schooling the world. And again, this can be found at lastnighters.com/35. So I'm going to read the little description about this, and then we can get into the discussion. So Schooling the World came out in 2010, and it is described as this. If you wanted to change an ancient culture in a generation, how would you do it? You would change the way it educates its children. The U.S. government knew this in the 19th century when it forced Native American children into government boarding schools. Today, volunteers build schools in traditional societies around the world, convinced that school is the only way to a quote-unquote better life for indigenous children. But is this true? What really happens when we replace a traditional culture's way of learning and understanding the world with our own? Schooling the World takes a challenging, sometimes funny, ultimately deeply disturbing look at the effects of modern education on the world's last sustainable indigenous cultures. So this is a documentary that came out, about 8 years ago, and it is available on filmsforaction.org I think it's like a donation basis. So if you watch it and you like it, you can sort of honor system, put a penny, take a penny, that kind of a thing, like Office Space. So, Robert, what are your thoughts just on the description there? And then we'll get into Jack's thoughts.
That's basically what the movie's about. It identifies, some aggression, which I appreciated in the very, very beginning. And then it kind of goes off the rails, trying to equate that to a more broad kind of worldwide problem as the movie sees it. So, and I think we're just going to have to get into all kinds of interesting issues with this film. And I think a younger me would have been very much more behind this movie. I think I would have been very much more into its message and been on board with, what it saw as issues and problems. But current day Robert found this movie to be fairly insufferable. And it's only about an hour-long movie, but I just kept pausing it and then taking notes and pausing it and taking notes. It took me about 2 to 3 hours to get through the movie. So I know I've got way more notes than I'll actually get to. But those are my initial thoughts.
All right. So before we get to Jack, I just want to mention that we have now launched a Patreon for The Last Nighters, and we can potentially go longer in that portion of the show. So Patreon supporters, you can support us at lastnighters.com/Patreon. We might have some of the content behind the paywall, so to speak, if our guests can stick around long enough so we can get through more of Robert's notes that don't fit into the roughly hour-long version of The Last Nighters show here. So, Jack, your thoughts on the description and just the overall, before we really get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak.
Sure. I mean, the film is definitely, a leftist bent on education, specifically, I'd say left anarchist, you can almost say. And it's interesting because it's probably the closest thing you get to a critique, of schooling from a seemingly like left anarchist side. So to me, that's just fascinating just to see on its own. That you kind of almost don't see too much from people who, and I say leftists to be concrete here. I'm talking about American progressives, people who are closer to egalitarians and things like that. And what's fascinating is that especially in you could say Western culture, America's Europe, a lot of the people who are progressives, leftists, like love education in terms of schooling, like they associate the two. And because there's such a strong push toward that from progressives, it's just kind of almost rare to see a critique of schooling as a concept because there's such a fanfare with it. I mean, it's a true fetish of modern leftists. So to me, it's kind of a fascinating glimpse into seeing what it looks like to have both a kind of leftist mindset and to actually be critiquing authoritarian things. So in some ways it's refreshing, but of course I think we may have some agreement here, Robert, about some of the other included claims from the video, because there's critiques there that deal with the nature of advancement, technology, people, and economy that I'm not necessarily a fan of, but it's a good food for thought. So that's what I kind of see the film as.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with both of your assessments. And I sort of, in watching it, likened it to back when I first became familiar with Ron Paul, I was also becoming familiar with Bernie Sanders. And they both agreed in a couple of areas. Like they were both diagnosing problems or the effects of problems. And they even agreed about, the Fed's a problem and we should audit the Fed. They were co-sponsoring things together. And honestly, at the time, I was like, oh, both of these guys sound kind of reasonable to me. Bernie was marked as an independent at the time. He hadn't, I guess, sort of come out of the political closet as a, more open socialist, at least not to my awareness at the time. But it feels like the movie's sort of doing the same thing, where it's identifying that there are some problems here, but it kind of misallocates them, because there's a ton of misallocation in here, and doesn't really have a firm grasp of what a better situation or a better solution might be.
Well, and it's also the take I got was it seemed to be a lot of kind of high-minded people, fairly like Marxy type thinking people, putting their judgment of what, their values onto this younger generation. Like these younger people were choosing to go to these schools so that they could partake in the global marketplace, could partake in, in compete for these tech jobs to get wealthy, to improve their life. But these people kept saying, are they really improving their life? Are they really, and like they're forgetting these old cultures that they're, kind of like leaving in the past. And it really just seemed to me like these people were making value judgments for other people. Like they valued these, other cultures. Great. I'm glad you find value in those people's other cultures. But to say that, these cultures are kind of being left behind in today's modern world and how this is like the worst thing. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't get all misty-eyed when the movie would juxtapose, a family, cutting wheat, like old school style with like a knife, And then some people on the other side, like, it's like super materialistic, and like maybe some people doing some drugs and, kind of like wastoid teenage US behavior, I guess you could call it. I was like, I don't know, man. Yeah, the wastoid druggies on the right aren't great, but at least they have the wealth to do it. At least they have enough food in their bellies. And they're obviously, they're making a value judgment of their own. I don't know. It seemed to me like it was a lot of privileged people talking about other people, and whether or not their lives they were living their lives correctly or not.
All right. Those are some very good points, Robert. And I want to pass it over to Jack. What's your thoughts on Robert's position here? Because it did seem to me like a lot of the people being interviewed, especially I think the guy's name was Wade Davis, who spoke in these sort of platitudes and rhetoric that sort of mixed harmony and nature with whatever buzzwords he was trying to fit into his little presentation there. But what are your thoughts so far?
Sure. Well, I think that it's really important to look at the nature of their critiques, because as you noted, the way they were describing consumerism and the way they were describing industrialism, clearly came from a leftist, seemingly either socialist or Marxist bent. It was very critical of it, and I think I can empathize with one aspect of that, and that is the compared to what was taking place, because the story here is focusing, I think it was on the Lakota, or the Ladakh specifically, and it was showing how people in what would be considered second, third world countries were being, and I say this, to be very, clear and literal, exploited, not because of, working to live, but rather actual government colonial imperialism coming in and taking lands, killing people, and commanding, that is mandating by the state, attendance in school. And that kind of backdrop there to this idea of the state trying to reprogram people who are relatively independent was a serious issue. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that I think it's great to live how they lived in terms of, living just off the ground and not really advancing anything in terms of science and technology. I personally don't care for that. But I can understand the idea here that when people were being pushed out from what was, their freedom and lands that they actually had and into the cities, into the state control, the trade-off there was that the state, government was working to undermine individual property rights. So in other words, it went from people actually like having a sense of land ownership and private property and food to just purely sustaining off of the city culture and the background taxes to, needing to live. And it wasn't really, going from, something that was, freedom to more free. I saw it as an imposition that went from having freedom but still relative poverty to, okay, you could have some forms of, schooling and education, but you're going to now be enslaved to the tax and control command cycle of statism. So to that extent, I could definitely empathize with the concept that, here you have these outside government people who are coming in and commanding people to change their lifestyles by decree of law, of force, of course. And this happened in the United States. It happened in other countries because of the British Empire and growing. It was one of the first things that took place is, if you want to, as I said, if you want to change the culture, take the children, re-educate them and indoctrinate them into worship of nationalism in the state. And you saw this quite clearly, whether it was even the mission schools, which was doing that for Christianity, or otherwise like the Native Americans in the United States, they were still fundamentally about turning those individuals into products to be used for those who are already in political and economic power. And I definitely empathize with that underlying point in terms of noting how that violence arose. Where it deviates from there is, for me, of course, is where they're describing and glorifying being in poverty, which is, of course, not exactly like the greatest thing in the world. Yeah, I mean, it's great to be, free and all and have your land and, have some independence, and control over your life. But, being in misery because you don't have access to modern medicine or, modern utilities, I personally don't really want that. I wouldn't want to live in that. So, it's one of those things where it's like they make a critique, but then they go too far and they critique, the wrong elements. When it really should be a focus on the nature of statism and using the violence of law to inculcate blind obedience with children to worship the state.
Yeah, it really is kind of annoying how it seems like only libertarians and ANCAPs are the ones that constantly have to point out aggression and where the source of the problem is. And it's usually in the aggression part. Like this movie seemed to equate like at first they started talking about colonialism, and I was on board. They were talking about how they forced the Native Americans to go into school and become good American Western culture people. Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. But then it kind of started demonizing like the German lady who came and set up a school, and the kids who wanted to go to that school or any other kind of tech school, like the best school. I want to go to the best school so I can get these jobs and compete in this, tech world, so I can make money and improve my life. And it just seemed to kind of wash between the two all the same. It was kind of funny though, back to your point about, the way it was glorifying like poverty. This movie seemed to be made by or made from an anarcho-primitive perspective. It was like, yeah, let's all go back. It's like Pol Pot would love this movie. Let's all ditch this technology crap and this crass materialism and Barbies and cell phones and get rid of this, and let's all go back to the land. It was really kind of disgusting. Like, how many people are going to die?
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. That's the part to me that I can agree with you there. There was a certain level of pedantry there because of the people who were speaking to this. Obviously they clearly were educated or, in specialized fields like the National Geographic guy, but they seem to have an odd lusting after a seemingly simple life or, an agrarian life. And it seemed just to me to be rather ignorant to, look at that with high praise when you consider the realities of it. I think a lot of people look at that as like a Disney movie where it's like, oh, everything's nice and there's no bugs in the wild and, you feel good all the time. But it's just not the case in reality. In reality, nature is brutal. The bugs bite. It's not fun. If you get an itch or a bite, a bite or a cut or this or that, it could be very deadly. Life is short and brutish without modernization, and advancing science in terms of medicine and being able to, resist the elements otherwise. So to me, I always find it concerning whenever, someone praises that too much, because it seems like as if they're on board with that eco-fascism, which is, this idea of like, just be happy to live on the land and go back to that because everything is just going to be peace and rainbows the second that, you're just living with pure nature. And, anyone who spent any time coming close to that can quickly disabuse themselves of that notion. Anyone who's ever gone like close to meaningful camp, kinds of camping, and you don't have any actual resource with you. And even that's kind of silly because most people are going to bring elements of modernity with them. It's very easy to find out, and it's not very pleasant to deal with the elements and with animals and with creatures without having some semblance of technology and advancement to resist that and not get injured or die. So, they have this like wishful thinking about it that, if you just go back to that, everything's just peace and rainbows the way that they present it. But yeah, it definitely comes from like this, a very abstract, entitled, sense or almost like a kind of death wish. The people who often hold that mindset kind of see humanity as a cancer to the earth, especially if you're, eco-fascist. So some people who are speaking made me think they were of that ideological bent, given some of their statements. But it's a fascinating discourse to see there.
Yeah, and it's also the promulgation or the continuation of like Marx's ideas, where he was talking about how factory work was dehumanizing and how, you couldn't be a full and complete human, and how it kind of debased us all, and how this modern tech work was debasing, whereas this, agrarian farming land, living on the life with the nature and the world is this reaffirming and life, enhancing. It's really kind of an arrogant perspective. And I guess he's like, an intellectual, so he gets to make this claim. But it's really an arrogant perspective to say that, oh yeah, that choice that you're doing to work in that factory and quadruple your income, oh, it's really actually hurting you. It's not doing anything positive for you. You're actually worse off. Really? Isn't it that guy's decision to make?
Sure. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned that income thing, because they mentioned one curious fact, which is the idea of, oh, well, your income's being shown as increasing because you're going from a non-cash relatively society to having, money. So just if you're switching over, it looks like you have a lot more. And I could empathize with that concept of, of manipulation, in the sense that if you went from a society that was based, mostly on just trade, you could say the commodities almost turn over into money, but basically you're not using, of course, dollars or other whatever types of cash money they use over there. If you're switching over, you may not necessarily have a better overall lifestyle. In other words, some people were still not necessarily living better. They didn't have open air land. They didn't have as much freedom. They may have been working in poorer jobs, and they didn't experience a true moving up compared to what they had before. I mean, and that's a real possibility for many people. The compared to what's is their life may not be technically that much better, but that's of course a subjective evaluation, right? And as you said, individuals should be free to choose if they value being around nature more or if they don't. And I think that in that sense, it would be condescending to, on one hand, be like, oh, nature is so great and this or that, but then to shame people because they don't wish to do that. They'd rather have at it and have it tried industrialization and living that modern economy. That said, though, again, the focus here, I think, was on the negative aspects of the industrialization that doesn't come on its own without context. When you're looking at what's happening in these other cultures and societies, it's not as close to, or I realize that's trepidation, but freedom as some Americans have it. And I say that relatively because it's, there's a big difference between like what we think is freedom versus, what is really experienced freedom. In terms of actual law enforcement, because there's many countries where it's like, oh, they have less freedom on the books, but you can just buy whatever guns you want. The police are not going to get you this or that. Whereas America has a lot more police and more fascistic police state. So it's it's just an interesting concept to kind of fully put on the mindset of what are these people's compared to what experiences. And in many ways, they were being exploited by the state apparatus. So I can see why these particular people were like, oh, see, look, their lives are not that much better in the city. It's all gross and it's polluted. And lots of people are trying, but they fail and they end up on the streets. So I completely get that. But the problem is they don't divorce the deleterious effects of the environment due to state paradigm issues related to property rights. They don't do a separate analysis on that, which I think is very problematic because you're swinging it into all or nothing thinking when you think, oh, it's just industrial or agriculture, but without contemplating the nature of the state, the laws, the restrictions, or the cronyism related to who can start a business, who can't, who can have a home, who can't, those things. So, I could definitely understand where they're getting their ammunition to say, well, look at the compared to what. See, they had a much better life when they were free to be on their own land and they could, do whatever they want in terms of compared to, being a dirty, city bum or street bum who, didn't succeed like they hoped. But I think that takes much more intellectual rigor, which they didn't bring to the table, to discuss the nature of how the state paradigm would keep people in poverty, keeping them in that cycle of poverty.
Yeah, those are very good points. And I think that sort of alludes to one of the opening statements about how Bernie and Ron Paul would often identify the problems, or at least the symptoms of the problems, but then they'd have vastly different conceptions of how they arose about and what was really contributing to them. So you guys both spoke a fair amount, and I kept coming up with like things I wanted to say, but you guys just kept going, so you had good flow. But I did want to just bring up the whole misallocation aspect again, because there is the compulsion aspect of sending these kids to school. So you get the taxation and the compulsion, so you get an overproduction of school. They're taking these kids from these rural areas and driving them away from those and putting them into these militaristic schools to where they really are ripping apart the family, because that was one of the critiques that this movie had, or this documentary had, was that they're destroying the family unit and the cultures and honing them into, division of labor is like a really good and positive thing for advancement, but they were looking at it as, well, you're only going to be good in these very narrow areas and you're going to lose the rest of all of your general ability to live within your culture. And so that was one of the kind of things that they were pointing at as being a problem. And I think that this was, more kids were in these schools because of the nature of how, the compulsion and the taxation in creating the schools. And had it been a voluntary situation, I think that you would have seen more of the kids stay, in the lifestyle within their culture, and the kids who had an aptitude for it or desire to do it would go and seek out educational opportunities to become part of, a greater network of technology and part of the global economy, and there would be no real issues here. I'm not saying it's, a utopic panacea for everything, but voluntary trade and voluntary transactions, voluntary decisions typically yield better results. And scene. Robert, you want to pick up there?
Well, I mean, everything you just said is absolutely correct. We mentioned this, and of course, I think we'd all agree that anytime you're forcing people to do anything, you are, by definition, misallocating resources. In addition to doing something immoral, people would choose, like you said, to do other things. And it's not just forcing, but it's also, like with the taxation and the other things, creating an incentive issue that may not exist in a voluntary society. So governments come in and they offer incentives for people to go into fields where they might not otherwise go into. They'll come out of a school thinking that, this degree I just got is worth something, when actually it's not. There's all kinds of issues when government gets involved in this sort of situation. And, that's why government shouldn't be involved in schooling at all.
Yeah, and to pick up there,
It just shouldn't.
I want to kind of point out a couple of things. Number one is that a lot of these people were do-gooders, thinking that they were actually helping and having good intentions. And as we all know, the road to hell is paved with them. But also, I've seen historically, and in the opening where they're talking about civilizing the Indians, like they civilized Wadey in The Outlaw Josie Wales, in that it is almost weaponized, like using school to eradicate differences between peoples and imposing the desires of the state upon those people. And we see that even to this day with compulsory school laws in the United States. Just two quick examples. Recently, there was a report of the number of school shootings in a 1 or 2 year period recently, and they had overinflated the number by something like 80%. And even NPR was the one who called them on it and said, well, actually, there were not 236 school shootings. There were more like 11. And a lot of these other ones were, someone committed suicide, or there was a firearm discharge on a campus or within a mile of a campus, or yada, yada, yada. But essentially, it was government statistics used to promote an agenda. And another one that I think just came out today, students in Ohio were given an exercise to select 8 passengers from a list of racially, ethnically, and religiously diverse candidates, including a gay athlete and an Asian orphan, to take safely to another planet. And their task was to rank them from most deserving to least deserving.
And how did it work out?
Well, probably not very well. I don't know what the results were for these kids, but to have that be your instruction, your lesson, promoting this egalitarian ideal, it kind of reminded me of the lesson of the mirror in the documentary here.
A mirror is what you use to look in to see yourself.
Yeah, and they had to really drive that point home for what seemed like half of the lesson.
He's like, yeah, you use it to look in and to see how you're looking and to make sure you look good, right? It's like, I could probably teach at that school.
You probably could. In fact, I know a lot of people who do the teach internationally, teach the English, and the qualifications are quite sparse from what I understand. Now, I'm kind of okay with that because, government being involved in certifying people is bullshit, but you know what I'm saying.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah, makes sense.
Interesting. Well, schooling is a fascinating topic, and the School Sucks podcast, I believe, is dedicated entirely to it. But one thing that I do want to mention, and I've mentioned this in the past, so forgive me if you've heard this before, but, schools, it all started back, in the Prussian days where, they had these issues with people not wanting to die for the state. And of course, if you want people to die for the state and you want to have these awesome wars and you want to take over the world, you need to have people that are willing to die for practically nothing, just patriotism. Just take over this feeling and the feeling that you get from being in a family and in a community and exploit that and use it for, death and destruction abroad. And if you're going to, indoctrinate people, you take them when they're young and impressionable, and you get them singing songs, and you get them pledging and swearing allegiance, and, you get them to rat on each other when they don't pledge and swear and bow down and give loyalty to the nation state. And, this is what happens when you have nation states who have a vested interest in having soldiers, because war is the lifeblood of the state. The state loves soldiers, dead or alive. They love them, and you need a healthy supply of them, and this is how you get them.
Well, you also need a healthy supply for your crony capitalists who want to have obedient workers in the George Carlin parlance. And I think that they cozy up to government to get, the obedient workers and the obedient soldiers.
There's probably a certain amount of that for sure. But, this is a fairly recent phenomenon. I mean, Prussian days, just a couple hundred years ago. Not that there haven't been nation states and whatnots, but, nation states weren't always involved in schooling. And I think we could, we can get a movement going to turn it around, to get it out of there, through unschooling and private schools. But even the private schools take a lot of money from government. So it's a step in the right direction, but the real answer is to just get them out of the indoctrination camps.
That's my plan. That's certainly my plan. We are looking at the unschooling and homeschooling options, and Jack and I have been exchanging information and ideas, and he's given me a couple of resources for decent websites talking about the various homeschool laws in different states. So I can put that on our show notes page because it might be a good resource for a lot of people. But Jack, let's swing it back to you. We've been speaking a lot here. Anything pop up in your mind while we were talking?
Yeah, I agree with you there in terms of thinking about the nature of schooling and its purpose. I think that was echoed in the documentary, was how it was very militaristic in the training, and that's what it originally was as you noted, it was to create obedient soldiers, and of course eventually later on obedient industrial workers. Having all young people be formalized into the same kind of base rote knowledge and obedience training. So that they would be willing to, effectively sacrifice themselves for those who already had political and economic power. And you saw that as well in the film, that the kids were doing militaristic style dances and their exercises, and doing their salutes and reciting, in some cases, prayers because at the mission school, or pledges to the state. And it's very sick what they do to young people, that in a way would never be excused in any other context. I mean, could you imagine if every day 5-year-olds were forced to stand up and pledge to Walmart, or Costco or something? I mean, it would be insane. You'd be like, what? You're having these little kids who have no idea what it is that you're asking them to pledge their lives to, just mindlessly repeat and recite these effectively prayers to a corporate organization. It would sound insane, but that's literally what happens across America for 50 plus million kids every school day. They start their day with the prayer to the state, effectively, and some people try to play it off as if it's benign. But if you have 12 consecutive years of a psychology of worshiping the state, I mean, by the end of those years, it just becomes natural. And normalized, the worship, and people have an emotional knee-jerk reaction to anyone who does anything different. That's the whole point is to culturally adjust people, to make that appear like as if that's just how it always was. Of course, people always loved the nature of the state, and you were just born here to do that and become a good citizen. And the level of manipulations is so much more severe, I think, in some ways, because you were saying how the modern schooling is kind of recent. In old times, like Roman era or before, if there was training in terms of education, schooling style, it was done with the military service. So the school and military service were just one and the same. But now, by divorcing that, it becomes much more readily cloaked the true nature of what schooling is. By having it separated from the uniforms of military branches, it cloaks what schools really are, which is just feeders for the state by and large. That's really what the end goal is to have people be completely subservient. And I write about this. I talk about this because I have been a former teacher. I've done criminal defense work as it relates to juveniles. I still work with young people and things like that. And I just, I've seen it up close myself. I participated in it. I'm not happy with my past actions, but I know what it's like firsthand. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And the most powerful tool of the state is to really take charge of people's seemingly good intentions and use it for manipulation and control, because in doing so, you have the most unassailable backdrop, right? I mean, how can you critique these people who are just trying to help the next generation be prepared to be adults and, take care of themselves? I mean, it's really brilliant at how well the indoctrination takes place, because you have a group of people who are, supposedly having these good intentions. So you have, these human shields to insulate criticisms of what is essentially a 12-year kidnapping process with home release. And, any other context, nobody would stand for it. Nobody would sit there and say, oh, yeah, if Walmart, makes a law that you have to go to Walmart school and, do the Walmart pledge every day. And it's weird if you think that this is weird, right? I mean, it's just that mentality that would be so obvious for any other corporate fiction, suddenly when it's the state, people just gloss over it. But they, at the same time would be critical if they saw North Korean kids or Chinese kids saluting their flags, like, oh yeah, those are the bad guys. But, they can't even look in the mirror and say, wait a second, we're doing the same thing they're doing. And sometimes they're not even doing it, as much or with as much reverence as compared to U.S. kids and people, So it's quite fascinating, the power paradigm of school. And I think that School in the World did at least do a good job of kind of capturing that visually. even though they missed the mark when it came to describing the ultimate problems and solutions, they at least capture that idea that, this is truly a product of pulling young people away from their families and turning them into, tools to be used for those who are in political power.
Yeah, those are all very good
sure,
points.
They sure did. That part was well stated, and I did appreciate that. And it can be difficult. I understand. We know when you're already being robbed for the tuition of the children today, to then again, take them home and spend time and school your children or send them to private school. Double paying effectively. But these, it's so important to teach children the truth when they're young, because there are still people today. I mean, adults, grandparents, retired folk who put their hand over their heart and sing "God Bless America" and go to the baseball games and treat it with reverence. And I mean, what happens to you as a child really echoes throughout your life, and especially when people have jobs and they've got families to feed and things to do to just live their lives, and they can't take the time to really think about this from a deep philosophical perspective. And most people aren't aware of this perspective on the state. So man, it's just so important that this kind of information gets out there.
Now, which one was it?
I've had enough of it. I mean, how does the state continue, if it doesn't keep indoctrinating kids? I don't know.
Right. And wasn't that Lenin or Stalin who said that, give me a kid from when he's 5 years old to when he's 18 and I'll have him forever? Something along those lines.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah. And
I'm not sure offhand, but
it certainly seems
it's the truth, regardless of whoever said it. I mean, that is absolutely the truth. If you have a child during their formative years and you're their influence for ethics, there's a lot of fighting intellectually you have to do to undo those assumptions that are built into a kid's life.
Right. I mean, just in our own experience, when you argue with a statist, it's like you're bumping up against their cognitive dissonance and their indoctrination, and it can be a really violent, not to say aggressive violent, but when you talk to somebody and you're bringing up a very uncomfortable subject, when it's really digging into that indoctrination, they will react very negatively and very, angrily at sometimes when you suggest that maybe the state shouldn't be involved in education. Mm-hmm. Maybe you don't want kids to be educated?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a great paradigm for them to play off of, because those who are in control of the state can literally turn it into every type of heartstring emotional appeal you can imagine. You hate kids, you don't want them to be successful, you don't love them, all this other stuff. I mean, and it's really nuts how much the nature of schooling and children can be used as a political tool. I mean, and that's why many of those in history, who wanted to take control over, the nation that they were ruling over, focused on getting the youth first, because it's very wise, if you're going to be a tyrant, to make sure that the upcoming generation is already bought in, without even argument, just by assumption of culture, that your rule is basically divine, that it's, of course, you're supposed to be in power. And that's every single major successful tyrant. I mean, I use tyrant, but really that's just descriptive of all political leaders. But they focus on making sure that the next generation is groomed to accept their rule.
Yeah, you even saw it in the documentary itself when they were teaching the Indian kids that their homes were primitive and backwards. Like they were literally telling them, like, hey, where you came from is not something that you want to go back to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they definitely do that, and they'll say that for all kinds of things too. Gosh, it's really, and that really shines through when you talk to teachers, because for many of them, if you are able to get them to open up a little bit on the internet, many of them do. They crack. In person, a little harder, but on the internet and behind the closed doors in teachers' meetings, I mean, they'll all say the same thing by and large, which is, parents are just too stupid to raise kids and they need professional help. And without this professional, gaggle of teachers, kids would just be, eating crayons and things like that, and they'd be dumb. And it's literally the complete opposite in terms of actual biology, psychology, and nurturing, that children are actually naturally curious and natural learners. And it's the nature of schooling that destroys that natural curiosity. That paradigm there is, built into teachers' minds, and they push that onto students through shaming tactics, getting young people to constantly question themselves, not in a good Socratic way, but in a competency way. And I think that's the grading process, which is really just meant to be an obedience test, because grades in themselves don't communicate necessarily knowledge. You can know things but refuse to do assignments. As see many very intelligent young people do. They just don't want to do homework or this or that. So, grades are really just signaling of someone's obedience to do things within a certain given period. And, that process breaks down young people's creativity. It breaks down young people's natural spirit of wanting to explore the world around them. And I think, just bring it back to the movie as well. I thought it was a good note how they said all these kids were once before in the fields, in nature, learning about animals. And now when they learn about it, it's just in a textbook looking at pictures. And I think that's a great point. Like this whole idea of you have to go stick a bunch of people into a sterile room in order to learn instead of the real thing. It's just such something that should be, so obvious, but that's become profound in a world where everybody thinks, you have to just congregate 30 kids, in a room and, show them images of the world as opposed to actually going out and experiencing it.
Reminds me of an episode of Rick and Morty where, Rick is constantly saying how school is just for stupid people. And he's pretty much true. But there's actually a specific episode where I think Morty's mom wants him to stop going on adventures. And Rick is like, but he's learning so much actually out in the real world, experiencing science and experiencing all these other worlds. And you want him to just sit in a room and listen to a teacher blather on about some crap? It's just ridiculous.
Right. And it is. And more than ever, the excuses are just gone. Like the idea of, oh, this young person's not going to have access to, this or that. And it's like the internet alone has destroyed that paradigm. I mean, now literally the world's knowledge is at your fingertips. If you want to learn or do anything, you can with a couple clicks, and you could be watching a YouTube video, a tutorial how to do stuff. You could watch 4K footage from people around the world. You could talk to people in different languages around the world. There's apps for that where people who want to just like learn languages can talk to other people, and it's, no cost in terms of, upfront cost. So, we live in a world now more than ever where the excuses are just not there. Virtually every young person could reasonably get access to tools of the culture and really learn anything they want whenever. So
right, and you make a great point about a lot of schooling in child labor laws affect this, but a lot of schooling is a lot of wasted time. I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I spent in school that I'm never gonna need. And even at the time, I was going, this is just pointless. Why am I here? When today, if you want to be a tradesman, it probably at 11, 12, 13, you could be a master knowing about everything just by watching YouTube videos about how to be a mechanic or, I don't know, an iron smelter or, you name it. There's any number of training available to, pursue whatever your life dream is. And sure, some people will want to be, plumbers and electricians, and great. And you can learn how to do that on YouTube. But then there's also all the high-minded philosophy and every other thing under the sun. So yeah, you're right. There's just really no excuse to say that, well, if we didn't have state education, we wouldn't have education and the kids wouldn't get educated. And, are you kidding me?
Yeah. It's literally the opposite. There's one, Sugatra Mitra, there's this one Indian guy who he set up computers in very poor districts in India. And the kids from the slums who didn't have formal education would come on the computer and they would teach themselves how to use it, other languages, and all kinds of crazy stuff. He installed the computer into walls in the slums, and kids, what happened was the kids would teach each other. So in other words, one kid learned one thing, and the other kid would, know another thing, and they'd help each other out. And basically just by having fun with friends and talking, all these kids were learning math, English, all kinds of crazy topics just because it was there and they were just naturally curious. It's just one of many examples. The Sudbury Valley School is another great example of how all young people really need is love and support from the adults who are in their lives in terms of just being there for them, just resources and just access to the general tools of the culture. And, more than ever, it's just becoming a reality for most people. And so one of the funny critiques that I always see is like, well, what about all those poor kids and stuff like that? And, I've seen poor kids, like kids whose their parents are like in Section 8 housing and they, come to school and their underwear is literally a plastic grocery bag. Like I've seen that kind of poor. And when you're dealing with that level of poverty, schooling is not the answer to begin with. Like if you're already a poor person, right, and you don't have home support, school is where you have all these added responsibilities and grading that's forced upon you in a limited time window where if you don't have home support, single parent, always work and don't have a lot of good food. I mean, compared to the other kids who might have support, you're at a disadvantage in terms of grading. There's no grace for those kids. You still are taking the same test. There's no poverty that gives you special grading privileges. Even under like you consider like there's 504 plans and IEPs and stuff like that, special programs for kids who are at need. But getting free lunch doesn't fix the other home life issues. So whenever people talk about poverty and issues like that, I mean, my response is very simple. If you have that situation, there's a lot more that needs to happen than just your education in terms of wholeness. You know what I mean? You need family support. You might need your mom or your dad or whoever, aunt, uncle, whoever, to have help in learning how to parent and learning how to become more wealthy, how to better their skills. You know what I mean? The school's not there for the parents. School isn't, parenting class. School isn't how to not be poor class. So it's not alleviating those other stressors. So since it's not alleviating the other stressors, all it's doing is taking these poor kids and putting them into a situation of high pressure and high stakes testing where they're going to just be labeled as failures anyway, compared to their economically more at a greater advantage peers, or more home support, 2-parent household and, love and all that good stuff. So, it's just really ridiculous, this idea of, oh yeah, but what about the poor kids? Like, yeah, the poor kids, the ones who are the most likely to be destroyed by the schooling system, the most likely to be recommended for, ADHD medication, the most likely to end up getting arrested, because of lack of home support and truancy laws and stuff like that. So it's just the opposite of what people think.
Yeah, and that was another thing that the movie did fairly well, at least bringing up is this one-size-fits-all approach that government takes. Of course, everyone learns differently, but you would never really know that based on, if you're just looking at the average modern U.S. school, because, the federal government, has certain standards, the Department of Education has certain standards, and you have to meet that in order to get the federal funding. So you have to implement certain programs in certain ways, and you have to teach in certain ways, and you have to go follow by certain textbooks, and it's all by these federal standards. And so it doesn't leave a lot of room for alternative approaches to education. It doesn't leave any kind of competition to perhaps teach a kid better or teach a set of kids better, because you just have this virtual monopoly and you're not actually competing with any other kind of schooling systems because you're forcing people to pay you. So in order to actually get out, you'd have to pay double. But, you get this one-size-fits-all approach, and they're saying that you get kind of one-size-fits-all, or you get this kind of like single type of person that comes out of it, and you get, other people that get left by the wayside. And on one part of me wants to say, yeah, that's competition. Sorry, that makes everybody better. Competition is good in terms of succeeding or failing. But like you've said, and like it's very demonstrably true, that, it's not necessarily, you're not really teaching anybody necessarily anything. It doesn't really display anything but obedience and the ability to memorize and regurgitate. It's really, how do we even know that it's the best way to teach anybody? Especially when, they'll change up the system every once in a while, and everybody all of a sudden has to change the way they teach. It's my father was a teacher for many, many years, and he had to go through this on a regular basis where, he figured he knew how to teach kids pretty good, and kids seemed to respond really well and do really well in his class and do really well in future schooling based on his teachings. But every couple of years, the administration would have some new program, and he'd have to throw everything out and start over again based on the latest fad or craze, when there's no competition, there's no price, there's no real understanding of value gained based on what you're doing. It's like they're just throwing shit at a wall and they don't know what's sticking. They're just like, we don't know. There's no feedback mechanism because we don't know what people are willing to pay for, because we're forcing people to pay for it.
Right. No, exactly. And two notes off what you're talking about. One is that this one size fits policy has been the norm for so long, and what's starting to change is the state educational bureaucrats are trying to shift things to do this thing called universal design for learning, which is like, oh, teachers, give kids multiple means of representation and multiple means of tools, like, to whiteboards and digital boards and other ways of doing things. They're like, oh yeah, everybody learns different. But it's still, again, just because you give kids more ways to do it, you're still having the exact same curriculum though, and the same standards. And they're doing that kind of change up as well with educational technology, because they understand that young kids are just really not having it anymore because they're growing up with cell phones and all this other stuff, and school's just too slow for them. So they're starting to switch over to self-progression based learning modules. So kids are just doing course modules at their own pace. So oh, see, look, it's so much better now because kids can do multiple ways of representing their work and multiple tools to learn. And now they can go at their own pace. But again, it's still the same one size fits all policy when it comes to you have to complete a certain progression. You have to complete a certain number of tests and all this other stuff. So this, the government's masking the nature of the compulsion even further, especially with things that are coming up, by trying to make those adjustments. But it's the same old thing. It's the same old one-size-fits-all policy for kids in terms of what they're learning, and age-based progressions. So it's really just the same old, repackaged. And on that, that turd, exactly what you're saying with the changing of curriculums and methods. Like I experienced that too, as a teacher, and lots of teachers are leaving because of that. Because every number of years that they'd be like, oh, this is the latest fad. Everybody's got to do this. And it's all new trainings. And of course, the cronyism that exists with the training companies and the state and the kickbacks, they're constantly pushing out new seminars and new books because they're trying to, build the school districts for as much money as they can. And the teachers are just, pissed off because now their 10-year binder that they just made to like create the perfect lesson or whatever, in their minds, of course, now has to go to scrap because now they have to redo the standards. And then when they switched it to the standards-based learning, in other words, these kind of like Common Core standards that a lot of states have ripped from, now what they do, and this is really bonkers, but what they do is they just take the standards and they just move them in order every year, every couple of years. And that way the publishing companies can like continue to transform the textbooks and transform the trainings just because all they have to do is move the standards in the order that you teach it. And all of a sudden, all this new stuff. So there's so much cronyism going on. It's really maddening. And even teachers who, again, I don't like teachers at all really, but self-hate here. But, it's even the teachers who, were okay with the old system and just had enough, and a lot of them throw in the towel. And many schools across the United States, as it stands, just can't retain teachers because the amount of work it takes to keep up with all the new things and technologies that keep, switching up, keeping up with all the 504s and IEPs, special accommodations for kids, when literally we're like hitting that point where it's like 1 in 3 and eventually 1 in 2 kids is going to be diagnosed with something, with ADHD or autism. I mean, it's stupid, insane. And now you're having to do all these specific special accommodations that you just can't do. Like it's humanly impossible within the time that you have to teach and do everything else. Like it's just not happening. So it's like teachers are just like blowing their brains out over it, which is great. Of course, I want this to all fall apart, but it's just one giant, cluster of terrible things that are happening all at once. And of course, who's getting the most hurt? It's the kids. The kids are the ones who are being tormented, who are being forced to sit for hours to do really stupid exams for the local district and for the state so that they can get those kickbacks from the crony testing companies. And, it's sick. You're going to see in the next 10, 20 years that this is going to be some of the sickest, kids coming out of schools. And it's because their mental health issues are going to be just through the roof because of the nature of schooling as it is. I mean, I watched it firsthand. I'm like, what they're doing to kids is literally child abuse, insane. So, there's going to be some real butterfly effects from how schooling has been in the past 20 years, especially.
Wow. Well, this is anecdotal, but speaking of teachers, I just want to bring up this little point. I remember in middle school, we had a teacher who would roll in hungover pretty much every day because it was just, that was just the way he lived. And it just makes me wonder, how much, because we're also having in the local area where I'm living, they're having a teacher strike because they want a fair pay raise. And it just makes me wonder, what should a bad teacher get paid? And nobody knows because we don't have any kind of a market because there's no kind of a price incentive mechanism for people, parents to voluntarily pay individual teachers. And there's no way. You just get a certain amount of money stolen from you every month and it goes to their salary. And what kind of, mechanism is there to even get rid of a bad teacher? It's really like onerous and it's like almost impossible to get rid of one if they want to. And then the good ones, like you did the process you're describing, it gets rid of the good ones because the good ones are like, screw this crap. This isn't the way to do it. It's a total shit show. Daniel, do you got any thoughts on this?
It sounds like a very volatile cocktail where you've got the intellectual high-mindedness where these teachers think in very broad strokes that they're martyrs because they do have to put up with this bullshit. But they also seem to think so down on the parents themselves. So they find that they're in a position where they're necessary, yet they feel underpaid and underappreciated. And then you give up, all these change-ups on them every couple of years. So they're in a very difficult situation. And I can see them totally feeling like they're victims. Even though, they aren't subject to really market forces and market pressures, I can see like why the psychology might be the way that it is. But to Jack's point, the kids are the ones who end up losing at the end of all of this. And so it's, I wouldn't mind seeing it kind of fall apart. I think that the whole concept of this whole top-down, one-size-fits-all education model is a recipe for disaster. And the more that we can get into individualized, sort of guiding children in whatever they express interest in, and you facilitate and you provide resources and you explore with them, because the point was made earlier, kids are naturally curious, and being put into the, you ride the little yellow prison bus to the day camp, day prison, the fun of learning gets beaten out of you. Not physically, mind you. I mean, when I was a kid, I actually did get paddled with a paddle. I don't think they can do that anymore, at least not in this state. But yeah, I remember many times just being like, why am I here? This is so pointless. Because they can only teach to, the middle band of the class, right? You're going to have a bunch of advanced people who they're not going to really learn much from that class. And then you got a bunch of people at the bottom who shouldn't be there anyway. And it's just the nature of trying to fit everyone all into the same shaped little box. But with that, I think that we're approaching roughly our time limit for the Last Nighters here.
Wow.
So maybe a last comment, and then we can do our final summary and review, and then potentially get into some more questions, because I do want to get into the what about their socialization and questions of that nature. Maybe we can do that in the Patreon bonus content area that can be made available to people at lastnighters.com/Patreon. So let's start.
Yeah. I'll definitely save some good stuff for the bonus then. I got some good stuff.
All right.
All right, sounds good. So, Robert, why don't you give us your summary and review, and then your score out of 10 to 1 decimal point.
Okay. Well, I think this movie raises a lot of interesting issues, and maybe I was a little bit harsh on it as I was watching it, because I really just reacted. I just bumped up really hard against all the kind of social justice-y lefty talking points, and the idea that, wealth is bad and grinding poverty is good as long as you have this like cultural, backbone. It seems to be that the older generation is constantly lamenting the change in the culture. It's like, in my day, blah, 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 blah. And the kids today, blah, 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 blah. They don't listen. It's like a story as old as time. And the older generation's constantly feeling, left out of the new world that the kids are creating. And, you don't value the traditions like we used to value the traditions. And there's something to be said for that, but it's also a story as old as time. And so there's a lot of that in this movie. And there's a lot of glorifying poverty, and there's a lot of trashing, materialism and wealth. And it's a lot of value judgment going on. But then there's also some really good stuff. Like the movie talks about the slaughter of the Philippines, which almost never gets brought up, but it was one of the colonialist actions of the United States in the 1900s, I think it was late 1890s and early 1900s, where we just invaded and slaughtered like 500,000, like the movie said. And you never hear about it, never gets talked about, never brought up, but it's because it's indefensible. But essentially the Philippines was like a U.S. colonial place after we subjugated violently the people just defending their homes. But it also brings up good points about the one-size-fits-all situation of this non-market force monopoly type schooling system. And anybody being forced into it is, of course, immoral. I mean, truancy laws, are you kidding me? In 2018, we're still like rounding up kids that don't want to go to school when they got cell phones that have all the world's knowledge on them. This is ridiculous. And then, of course, the fact that they're, indoctrination centers and creating drones to fight in wars. Lots of good stuff. But yeah, the bent really, really turned me off on this movie. So I'm not going to give it a positive score, but I still think it brings up some important issues. And I do appreciate having watched it. So I'm going to give this a 4.1 out of 10. There are probably better movies that discuss these kinds of things, but I haven't seen them. So I'm going to say it's the best movie of its type that I've seen. But I don't think it offers any kind of real solutions. But it does bring up some problems. So that's my score.
All right. Very good, Robert. And Jack, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't really have a pick score, but there's one powerful thing I think you just said that may have left me with some inspiration. I'm not sure if I'll use it, but I'm tempted on it now that you mentioned it. And you said this is one of the best, if not, the only movie you've seen tackling this issue. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. That was my thoughts on it as well. Like, this is not commonly covered, because anyone who talks about it gets blackballed, lampooned, threatened, shamed, told that they're, an idiot or incompetent, because if you critique it, then they just automatically assume, well, you must be a dummy. You must be, a bumbling buffoon. And that's actually kind of, I think, an important call to action, because this is something that is so powerful and important, how much it affects, people in society at large. There should be another documentary that tackles this issue from a more, I guess you could say, academic, if you want, standpoint that's more consistent around the nature of property, individual rights, and things like that. And maybe that is something to do and to fund and do a project for and create, because there's like a Sudbury Valley documentary from I don't know, 10 years or more back, but there isn't anything or at least I haven't seen that is exhaustive. I mean, I've seen some things about Prussian schooling and the history, stuff like that, but nothing that really both critiques the nature of school and its history and inception and so forth, but also dives into what is better, what is more ethical and effective. And I think that's actually something that might be around the corner for production, for making something about. So that might be something to do.
All right. Well done, Daniel.
All right. Well, I think that you guys have both torn this thing apart pretty well. For me, I also enjoyed the fact that it was recommended and it was definitely worth watching, because it is at least a critique of the current model. And as I alluded to in the very opening here, it's sort of like they can see the problems, but then they misdiagnose like what is causing them and what the right solution might be. And they do demonize money and consumerism and advertising, and they really play up the destruction of culture. Now, I'm sort of sympathetic to that, especially in light of how schooling from this top-down model drives out the individuality and the cultures that are, native to the people who are being forced into these schools. And so that is definitely a loss. And I think that without the misallocation and without the force, that you would see a lot less of it. And it also comes down to, voluntary choice, like people desiring to learn things and seeking out the knowledge that they think will actually improve their lives versus being forced into these militaristic day prisons. So, school basically is a day prison, and they make that pretty well known within this documentary. So I think, again, the diagnosis is really good. The point of the, road to hell is paved with good intentions. Jack, you actually brought up a point where, they not only have the intellectual cover, but they also have the emotional cover. And it's like a really good 1-2 punch in favor of the state. And then, of course, in the Bastiat sense, if you ever say anything bad about how the manner in which something is provided, you're assumed to be against that thing being in existence at all, versus just the mode and method by which it's paid for and administered. And it reminds me of a Rothbard quote where he says, it's clearly absurd to judge a person's education by how much schooling they've had, to roughly paraphrase. I don't have it exactly. But Rothbard had a really good series of lectures on the Progressive Era, and they just resulted in a book called The Progressive Era, where he talks about how the development of the U.S. Education system was used as a weaponized form of driving, I think, Catholics out, and pushing the Protestant views, liturgical views within a top-down structured education process. So I'm going to post a link to that down below on the show notes page, which can be found at lastnighters.com/35. My score is going to be a little bit higher than Robert's. I'm going to go with a 5.5 on this bad boy, and we'll start winding down the show here. We'll get into some bonus content that's available for our Patreon supporters. But before we do that, Jack, why don't you just remind everyone where they can find your stuff, and then we'll say goodnight for this portion of the show.
Sure. If you want to get in touch with the stuff I lean toward the most, that is my favorite part of the things that I do, because it's more like my hobby. But that's volcomic.com. That's for the Voluntaryist Comic series. But even if you don't see volcomic.com or any of those videos related to that, I'm sure you'll see memes I make somewhere, because I have a very large share of the meme market cornered at this point.
Memes for days. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. This has been The Last Nighters, episode 35. So show notes and more at lastnighters.com/35. And we're also on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. So please do check that out. And all of the other great content that they're producing over there at the Launchpad. Super good stuff. And I'll say good night for last night.
School sucks.
All right, and we still got our actual Anarchy audience for a few more minutes. I did want to mention that we were your centerfold in last year's Voluntaryist Comic. So if anyone has that, go ahead and open right down to the middle, and you can see our two ugly mugs in our advertisement from last year. And we're doing it again this year, and so that's going to be the basis for the rebrand for the Last Nighters website at lastnighters.com. And so there's a sneak preview of that artwork available on our Patreon. So if you want to take a peek at that, Jack's already seen it. Robert's seen it. You guys approve? Thumbs up on that?
Yeah, man. What issue is going to be in?
Your latest ad's going to be in issue 2. That is Origins 2. So what's happening now is I'm going through the chronology on the story, starting with the Inception issue. So before I had done a number of campaigns, but they ended up being more prototypes for the future. And then once I kind of laid the groundwork for the universe, now I've been like officially working the canon. So you guys jumped in with the double pager in the Origins 1, which I just was giddy to see because I'm like, whoa, it feels so real with this comic book because now there's this really cool, double page ad that's actually like liberty oriented and it's well designed to like look like a theater review at the rating. I'm like, this looks good. It's high quality. So I was pumped when I saw that. And, lots of people got to see that because I went out to all the past supporters of, the last 8 campaigns. And lots of people have actually been downloading or buying the book, comic books, to even my surprise. Because, again, I'm making a comic that's literally a niche of a ditch. And I'm still shocked at how many people, read it or share to this or that and how the fan base has just continued to grow. To my happy surprise, of course, that was the goal. But it's always incredible to see, hey, look, you like Liberty and you like comics. Oh, and you like superhero comics. Great. It's pretty wild to see that there's that many people in the niche of a niche that I do.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. We're excited to be a part of it, a small part. And, I had tempted to do, since it's a centerfold, topless photos for it. But Robert didn't really like my idea. It was going to be the Seinfeld with Kramer and George doing the where it looks like he's wearing a sweater, but he's not.
I could have sold 1,000 extra copies if I told him that was in there.
Maybe next time. Maybe next year.
Maybe next time.
But anyway, I want to thank you for being with us on this actual Anarchy portion of the show as well. And we're going to get into some of the additional notes and talk about socialization and some of the other juicy tidbits that you're saving for our Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is available for the Patreon supporters. So we can get into that in just a moment. And everyone, you can find the show notes and more for this Actual Anarchy show at actualanarchy.com/92. And Robert, do you have any final words while we say goodnight before we get into the Kathleen Turner Overdrive?
Thanks for listening, everybody. It makes me happy that you're all checking us out, listening to these thoughts, these ideas that really, if they were implemented, would, in my opinion, make for a better world, a far, far better world, free of coercion and violence, violent aggression. So yeah, spread the word, spread the show, share us on social media, get us out there. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.
All right, that's as good a spot as any to cut it. So we're in Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is a lot more laid back. So more cusses and swears are totally permitted. And
I forgot to check with you what was permitted or not, but
actually,
hopefully my KY and Astroglide wasn't too racy in the beginning.
Actually, we swore quite a bit in our last one on the Outlaw Josie Wales.
Okay,
at least a dozen times. So it was good stuff.
Good.
I wanted to talk about the socialization aspect because a lot of the issues that you brought up were these kids, especially the poorer kids who have less family support at home and maybe don't have proper clothing and food, so they're going to these schools hungry and dressed, kind of oddly, like in plastic bags, if you will. I would imagine that they are also the ones who are subjected to social problems and bullying because they're being forced into a system, into a school where there's just a bunch of kids who, might be nasty bastards to them, be mean to them. And that can only add to the pressure that they're feeling, not only being, like told when they can go to the bathroom, being graded on things, but having that lack of support and then being put into the hog pen with all these other kids. And
Absolutely.
people, say, oh, you're homeschooling. What about their socialization? I'm like, well, their socialization in prison camp is not very good.
Right. No, and that's actually a really important part of discussing the dynamics here. And, I personally am, of course, very pro-competition. I'm very competitive myself. I enjoyed that in school personally, even though I kind of didn't like school and all the work. I enjoyed being, top of the class, and I was getting all the awards and all that good stuff. But reflecting on those things and living it in terms of, being a teacher and working with kids and, multiple environments, when you're not the person who's at the top anymore, you can really see the full gamut of what's going on in terms of how schooling actually encourages artificial competition, not healthy competition, artificial competition and social hierarchy in a way that is destructive. Like, I'm not talking about egalitarianism here, although, a lot of, leftists might critique schooling in that way. I'm not speaking about hierarchy in terms of an egalitarian outcome. I'm speaking about it in a state construct of force and violence and creating unhealthy competition and unhealthy shaming because of the power dynamics in the coercive context. So when it comes to young, kids, they're all congregated by age groups. That's by and large it. There's a cutoff date, and you're expected to be a certain class, and maybe you might test out to another grade. But by and large, everyone's roughly within a year of each other, close enough. And what happens is everybody, because they're congregated in this one age group, they already have this artificial shaming mechanism that exists based on grade levels, right? You have older upperclassmen bullying younger kids because they treat them as lessers or their underlings. You have competition among kids in terms of favoritism for the teacher because there's a limited, social resource. So the teacher can't be friendly with everyone. The class time does not allow for really that much interaction at all, hardly a minute or so. So you have that unhealthy competition for just being favorited in a command and control environment as effectively a prisoner, trying to curry favor. You have the unhealthy competition that exists in terms of the school's valuation of who is worthy of advancement and honors and praise and who is not. And these competitive forces are not based on virtue, voluntarist virtue, non-aggression, empathetic listening, and nonviolent communication. It's obedience, right? The teachers, you'll be hard pressed to find a teacher who doesn't say, and if they really were honest, that their favorite students are the ones who are not very talkative in terms of talking over them. They do all their assignments on time. They don't talk back and those things, right? So you have a very unhealthy power dynamic where obedience, subservience is rewarded chiefly. And those who decide to not value what school values in terms of tests, quizzes, or homework are treated as if something is fundamentally wrong with them, as if they're broken, right? A kid who's not getting good grades is going to get called to the office. Principal might talk to them, teacher might talk to them, might be a note sent home. And they treat young people as if they're dysfunctional just because they just simply choose not to value what school values. And I've seen this time and again, even as a teacher. I had one student who I felt terrible for him because he was like a true libertarian at heart. And he's like, he said, I don't want to be here. He said, I would rather be learning how to work on boats. He's like, I hate this. He's like, I hate having to be here. And, these are young people as young as 12 who can articulate these things well. And, the schooling environment inherently creates this artificial competitive competition environment that actually springs forth the bullying and the lack of empathy, because young children in class are told to set aside their emotional and physical needs for the mandates of the authority. They're denied bodily autonomy. They're told to be quiet, and they're told that their interests and their passions don't matter. Whatever they want to do, do that later after class. If you finish your homework first, right? Or if you finish studying for the next test, or whatever. And this diminishing of individual autonomy and emotional, well-being for young kids really breeds a type of psychopathy and/or sociopathy. And I'm not saying this in hyperbolic terms. I'm being very literal, because the classroom environment demands that you consistently put aside any of your own identity or interest and immediately, kowtow to whatever the teacher commands. And if you don't, you're eventually going to get to a point where you could be, threatened with confinement, like detention, which I've seen little kids in detention, literally first graders, and it's disgusting. They like they can't even like barely put together their sentences and stuff, and they don't even understand why they're being punished. And most of the time, it's just because they're trying to get their emotional needs met. It's just absolutely insane that you see this, but this is a norm across the United States. Is punishing kids for just wanting to be free and play. And then, further worse, the shaming and telling young kids, they're going to end up at McDonald's or, this is the thing to do, but with not any rationale behind it. It's just command and control. And then further, you have the pushing toward kids, getting medicated, and teachers don't, prescribe anything, but they definitely can call parent meetings and sit there and say, hey, have you considered getting your child tested? Have you considered seeing a psychologist? Or maybe we can call the district resources officers and see if we can get one of their ESE coordinators to give us someone to test your kid, because they're willing to do anything to get kids to just be obedient for the sake of testing and grade results. And this essentially has pushed this massive rise in ADHD diagnoses among young boys. Young boys are the most susceptible to being pushed onto medication because of lack of conformity in the environment. And it's not surprising, because all these young kids need lots of free play and time to let out energy that's happening because of their growth and puberty. And while that's happening, school recesses are being cut down in terms of time. Free play is being cut down, and their day-to-day activities are being controlled, with helicopter parent or, helicopter principal mentalities. And so you're having what's, a very sick culture of sedentary kids who are overweight, overworked, mentally just going insane because they're told to deny their very body's needs for lots of physical activity during the most critical daylight hours. And so, what you're going to eventually see as an outcome of this, and we've already seen some of this from the 90s, is all these young people growing up on prescription drugs to control their behavior, with side effects of them ballooning, getting overweight, suicide as a side effect, depression, and so forth. So all these young people who are having their brain literally destroyed by these psychotropic drugs to conform to the schooling environment is wreaking havoc on the next generation. So it's something that is I take very seriously, and that's why I'm really passionate about it, because this isn't just like maybe they just need a little bit more research. I mean, this is life or death here. They're literally killing kids 1 hour at a time in the schooling environment. And it's something that is going to lead to a generation of very broken young people, very dysfunctional young people, young people who are going to be on all kinds of government welfare, having all kinds of problems, relationship problems, emotional problems, physical problems when they get older. And in many ways, the ones who survive, are going to be infantile. They are going to still maintain a very childlike psychology because they never, had the chance to really grow their own independent thinking and critical thinking, because they're so busy just trying to conform, to not be threatened or shamed or punished. So it's very serious what is taking place, and this is it's unique. It's not something that's has been going on the entire time. There's been a specific material change in the schooling day in terms of number of hours for students, and a cutting down of recess, and a change in how kids are treated, zero tolerance policies. So this is not something that's been, it's always been this way. We're talking about a change that's happened over the course of 30, years or so in the schools, and even, maybe a little bit longer than that, because I've seen some of this through my dad, who taught for 30 years at a New York City school, inner city school. And I witnessed it myself. So it's quite scary what's coming.
Yeah, that's a good rant there. I'm curious if we can talk about maybe some positives, because I think that homeschooling has gotten more of a foothold and has expanded. There's more educational freedom in more states now than there has been in past decades. Is that one of the potential solutions to get out of this this trap that a lot of these kids are in these schooling structures that are destroying them? Is it getting that information out there, like, hey, do homeschooling? That is a potential solution. Do unschooling.
Right. Yeah. And homeschooling is markedly, different in terms of category than unschooling, because homeschooling, you could have, just as oppressive curriculum and minutia monitoring of parents. So I first am advocate of education in terms of that being more ethical and people to, direct their lives And that's a special process in terms of environment and psychology. And of course, there are parents who do this as unschoolers, and it's homeschooling environment, so it's just them or them and their co-op or whoever they hang out with. But there's also facility organizations. One of which is probably the most largest flagship one is Sudbury Valley Schools, where they have a house, a very large house, and there's multiple adults who could help kids, and they have computer rooms and outdoor areas and all kinds of stuff, and kids are just free to learn or explore as they see fit. To me, I see that as the ethical wave to strive for and to build upon, but that's going to require a lot of people working really hard to go in that direction, because it's a very big battle to get people out of the psychology of this mentality that if you don't go to a traditional school, you don't have traditional schooling, traditional curriculum, your kid's going to end up being illiterate and unable to cope with anything. It's just the complete opposite of those assumptions that are built in by years of indoctrination from schooling and threats of the state, and being like, well, if you don't do this, then you're just going to be dumb. And it's just not true at all. Actually, most young people are able to learn to read and write when they, self-direct and have self-interest. They learn critical thinking skills through discussing things with others, exploring, asking questions, researching, playing with different types of games and this or that. So, it's something that people are just so unaccustomed to because they've just, wrongfully combined the concept of education and schooling. And education is the sum of what, someone has learned in their life and their experiences. And schooling is more just this, physical force of getting kids to get roped into a building and tell them what to do hour by hour. And it's just a paradigm shift that needs to take place so that there's more opportunities for families to be able to explore this. The more people who are aware of this and who can understand, kind of the mandates behind it, the self-directed education ideas, which, if you're not familiar, can be found at self-directed.org. It's the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. And also peaceful parenting. This kind of like foundation has to kind of be there first, because without understanding, just floundering by, not being effective as a support for their kids, or they're not really there to be an emotional and intellectual support for them. And so, things that, are not helpful to their learning process, take place because, the parent is not aware of the conditions that optimize self-directed learning environments. So it's something that, definitely should be explored, but also taken seriously by parents and, families who want their child out of these very toxic environments.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of parents look at school as sort of a daycare for their kids, while they're at work, and then the kids are at least occupied, and they probably believe the lie that they're actually being taught something that's useful and valuable, and that they're going to come out better for it. I'm just curious, for you, when you went into teaching and then you experienced a lot of these things firsthand, were those transformative experiences for you, or were you already like a voluntarist when you went into the teaching?
I was already a voluntarist, but part of me was, I really wanted to see for myself what was going on. And in doing so, I thought I could maybe help kids in some ways, but the more I was in it and the more I was studying everything, there really is there's no ethical and effective way to help kids in the system, because you will inherently, as a teacher, you're going to do things to not get fired, of course. I mean, of course you do it, but you get fired. You're going to have to implement policies that, hurt kids in that environment, whether it's grading or whether it's, threatening them, to not do certain things, because when you're in that environment, it is a prison, a prison warden psychology. It really is. There's no way around that. And as much as teachers might seem friendly and stuff like that, they are carefully plotting out a classroom to ensure compliance. They're constantly doing things to manipulate, children socially. And there are real threats from young people because they have that mentality that they're a prisoner in many respects. And many of them will do things or say things to either try to get you into trouble yourself or, possibly to threaten you and things like that. Because there is that power dynamic. And it's something that when you're there, I just, I felt really terrible about my own actions and the things that I saw. But I realized that, through that there really is no way to fix this or do better. It's through and through unethical, and it is not possible to change it from the inside. It really isn't. You're going to be hurting and damaging kids for life in that role. There's no way around it. No matter how nice the teacher is, no matter, if they're like providing extra help in the morning or maybe giving food to a kid who needs it, doesn't matter. Those little glimmering nice things. You're going to, as a teacher, enact policies that will ruin kids for life effectively in many regards. So, to me, I'm glad that I did that in the sense that I could speak more effectively about it. And I really wrapped my mind around the modern practices of what's taking place. Because I obviously went to school myself, and I have, a bachelor's degree, a doctorate, and my dad was a teacher for 30 years. So I went to his school and got to see some things, because his school was crazy. They had the metal detectors starting in the 80s. So if that gives you a sense of the roughness of the school, but being able to see that firsthand, I can articulate what is happening with a lot more precision. So I'm thankful for the experience, but I don't approve of who I was or what I did as a teacher, even in my best efforts to not cause more harm. So.
Well, and speaking of how rough it is for the kids, you've got like all the things we've discussed so far tonight, all the things they have to deal with, and they're butting up against this education, I put that in air quotes, education style that they're supposed to learn, and there's the pressure from the teacher, and then there's the pressure from the parents. Because, I see this with the young kids today that I'm, nieces and nephews and other friends and nieces and nephews and kids of my friends and that sort of thing. And there's this tendency of parents, especially statist parents, of course, to look upon, people in authority with some kind of reverence as if they're experts. Like, a kid is acting up in school, so they go into a parent-teacher conference. And it's all about how, they can get the kid to act better in this class because clearly the kid is in the wrong. Clearly the teacher knows best and he needs to behave in this class. And so he can get good grades, so he can do yada, yada, yada. And it's like, man, teachers, they're just people that you grew up with. They're not a whole lot smart. Maybe they have a little bit of specialized knowledge in how to educate a person. They did go to school to learn about how to be a teacher. But man, I would be so much more interested in hearing what my own kid had to say about his experiences and how he feels about the situation than to just blindly trust, the educators, the teachers, the principals, and how my kid needs to fit in their, his square peg into their round hole and cram him in there and make sure he does what they want. It's, man, I really feel for these kids and having to try and satisfy everybody around them.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's a very difficult position for young kids to be in because they're in a constant battle for needing to signal in order to be seen as worthy of love and support in many cases. Obviously there's parents who are good about that and they do it no matter what. But I would say it's much more common to see love and support withdrawn from whether it's teachers, administrators, or parents over grades and other things related to school. My gosh, than anything else. There's one thing that really gets parents worked up or teachers worked up is kids if they're like getting in trouble in school or getting bad grades and things like that. And everybody's asking all the wrong questions, which is how do we get him to conform or her to conform to this environment, which is dysfunctional and toxic, instead of asking, is there a better way, a more ethical way for young people to learn and explore their environments and grow their minds? And that's the real problem, is people are constantly trying to have young people conform to what is a very dangerous and dysfunctional environment instead of looking for something that is more ethical and will develop skills in young people that makes them much more effective to talk to all kinds of people and work in all kinds of diverse environments, because they haven't just spent their last 12 years with just their peer group by and large, all those years. So
yeah, super good stuff. Now, I hate to cut this a little bit short, but my wife is asking me to come in. So, Jamie, it's been a pleasure having you on. I do appreciate this. You are a fount of information and knowledge and experience. So you're a triple threat, and we'd love to have you on again sometime. And might I add that one of our fellow podcasters in the Libertarian Union, he just passed the bar exam. And
Patrick?
Yes, yeah. And you might find a good opportunity to be a guest on his show to discuss any of the things that you are quite knowledgeable about. But he's a really good guy, so I hope you guys can connect and make something happen there. That'd be fun.
That would be. I watch some of his videos and comment sometimes, but he doesn't keep as much up on his social media. But but I've watched a number of his videos because of those things. There's a lot of little shadows there with the things he's doing and I've done. So.
Yeah. So, Robert, any final words before we sign off?
Well, there were, there were some stuff I wanted to trash on the movie, but I don't think it's appropriate. I mean, I think the discussion we've had has been really, really good, really valuable, and we've focused on some positive things. In addition to pointing out just all the horrific negative things that is just wrong with the system, I think that's more important than necessarily trashing on the movie at this point. So I really want to thank Jack. You brought a lot of expertise and specific knowledge to this discussion, and it's been immeasurably better than it just would have been with me and Daniel. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we don't have specific knowledge.
And if you want one last little thing, I won't go on a rant, just for your listeners, just for them to note, because of the nature of everything that's happening with school, what you effectively have now is that all the teachers, pretty much anyone with a conscience, they turn over within 5 years. So what you have now is any teacher that's still sticking around is comfortable enough with abusing kids and being a control freak that they've stayed. That's what we have in schools, and that's how come you see all these teachers who are like bringing out kids for gun control and all this other stuff, because the only teachers are left are the ones who are literally state worshiping control freaks. Because everybody else, even if they're not necessarily political, who have the small semblance of an ethical, consciousness, and when they see kids and all this testing and all this crap that's happening to them, they leave. Within 5 years, they leave. So everybody else who's staying past that, just know they're all status control freaks, and that's what you have in public schools.
Yeah, and to just piggyback on that, my father, whenever they were hiring a new teacher, he would kind of sit in the back, kind of be one of the people asking questions and doing that, and there would be a strong-willed, intelligent applicant that, had a lot of fire in their belly, had a lot of interesting things to say, and that person would not get hired. Wow. It would be the person that the superintendent and the principal thought that they could control, and they would go along with the system.
Oh, yeah.
Go along with the program. And so that's who you're getting teaching your kids these days. It's the people that are willing and just absolutely, yes men.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
That's who you're getting. You're not getting mavericks with interesting ideas that want to contribute to, make better kids and educate children better. It's people who are going along with the program and implementing whatever new horse shit that they get shoveled with from year to year. So enjoy it if you got your kids in these schools.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, that was a couple of mic drops at the end there. So thank you guys both very much. Very good stuff.
Mic drops, sir.
Yeah, or a slide rack.
Slide rack.
All right. Well, hey, thanks again. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad we got to meet in person. I really enjoy your work and just talking with you in general. You're a super cool guy. So thank you so much for
you guys as well. I love the work you do.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're trying. Every little bit helps. So anyway, let us know when you need the artwork. You said a couple more weeks so we can tweak it a bit. And we would like to coincide a show with when that comes out. We're going to do Starship Troopers, right? That's the one? Yeah.
Ooh, good movie.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I like that movie.
We're doing our part.
To stop the bug menace.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you again. And Robert, I forgot to mention what we're going to do next on the show. I guess I'll just do a blog post about it or something. It'll be fine. Anyway.
Yeah. Do we have an idea?
I was thinking Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2.
Oh, that's right.
Contrast.
That's right. You did mention
and then we can
that.
get into the gum stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Yep, we can do that.
Sounds awesome. We toss them. They're awesome.
All right, buddy.
All right. Hey, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Patreon supporters, for sticking around this long. Plenty of good content here. Well worth the $5 that you pay for the extra bonus content.
True that.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.